On the morning of my 71st birthday, my son handed me a manila envelope across the breakfast table and said, "Dad, we think it's time." Inside was a brochure for Sunridge Senior Living in Tucson, Arizona. Full-color photos of smiling white-haired people doing watercolor painting and playing shuffleboard. A highlighted room rate of $4,200 a month. And a sticky note in my daughter-in-law's handwriting that said, "We already toured it for you. You'll love it." I set the brochure down carefully, the way you set down something fragile that you don't want to break in front of the person who gave it to you. My son was watching me with that particular expression he'd developed over the past 2 years. Patient, slightly pained, the look of a man waiting for a slow computer to load. "It's a good facility," he said. "Rated 5 stars, I'm sure it is," I said. I finished my coffee. I thanked him for the birthday brochure. Then I drove home to my apartment in Flagstaff and sat in the kitchen for a long time without turning on any lights. 3 months earlier, on a Tuesday in February, I had received a phone call from a law firm in Denver. My brother Clive had died of a stroke in December. We'd been estranged for 11 years over a property dispute that I won't get into, and his estate had taken 2 months to settle. Clive had never married, no children. His timber holdings in Montana and his real estate portfolio in Colorado had appreciated far beyond what either of us had imagined when we were kids sharing a bedroom in Boise. The attorney's voice was professional and unhurried when he told me the number. 41,300,000 and change. I had asked him to repeat it. He did. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a Safeway and stared at a cart return for 20 minutes before I could drive home. I hadn't told my son. I'd meant to. I'd rehearsed the conversation a dozen times. "There's something we need to discuss. Something significant has happened, but something stopped me each time. A hesitation I couldn't name at first. Then, slowly, I began to understand what it was. I was watching, waiting to see what he would do when he still believed I had nothing but a retired civil engineer's pension and a one-bedroom apartment. Now I knew. I looked at the Sunridge brochure on my kitchen table. The highlighted room rate, the sticky note. "We already toured it for you." I turned it face down and started making notes on a legal pad. My wife, Nadine, had passed 4 years earlier, pancreatic cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. Our son, Wade, he goes by Wade, though I named him Walter after my father, had been attentive during those months. He and his wife, Celeste, had driven up from Phoenix on weekends, brought food, sat with Nadine in the evenings. I had believed, watching them, that we were the kind of family that held together when things got hard. After Nadine died, the visits tapered. Phoenix is 3 hours away. They had their lives. I understood that. I moved to Flagstaff to be closer, half the distance, and told myself the proximity would help. It did for a while. Dinners maybe once a month. Wade calling on Sundays, though the calls had gotten shorter as the years passed. 20 minutes became 10, became a text that said, "Thinking of you, Dad. Hope the week's going well." Celeste had never been warm toward me exactly. Polite, yes. Organized. She ran their household the way a project manager runs a job site, efficiently, with clear deliverables and zero tolerance for scope creep. I was, I think, an item in her mental spreadsheet that had moved from the manageable column to the pending column sometime around my 68th birthday, when I'd mentioned that my knee was giving me trouble on stairs. The Sunridge conversation had been building. I could see it in retrospect, the way you can see weather coming from a long way off when you've lived somewhere long enough. Celeste mentioning an article about aging in community. Wade asking if I'd thought about downsizing. A phone call 3 weeks before my birthday where he'd said, carefully, "You know there's no shame in getting support before you actually need it, Dad. Proactive is always better than reactive. I am a retired civil engineer. I built water treatment systems for 29 years. I understand infrastructure." What my son was telling me, in the language of a man who'd learned communication strategies from corporate workshops, was that I was becoming a liability in the load calculations, and it was time to reroute me somewhere manageable. What he didn't know was that the man he was rerouting had $41 million in a Fidelity account, and had spent the past 3 months quietly deciding what to do about it. The week after my birthday, I made an appointment with an attorney named Sylvester Prout. I'd found him through a colleague from my engineering days. A referral chain of 3 phone calls, each person vouching for the next. Prout was 63, semi-retired, operated out of a small office near the university. No reception area, just a room with 2 chairs and a desk covered in file folders, held together with rubber bands. He'd been an estate attorney for 31 years. He shook my hand and told me to start from the beginning. I told him about Clive, about the inheritance, about the brochure with the highlighted room rates, and the sticky note in Celeste's handwriting. He listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. Then he asked, "What do you own jointly with your son?" "Nothing," I said. "After Nadine died, I kept the house in my name alone. I sold it 2 years ago and moved to the apartment. Everything is in my name. Did he ever ask you to put him on accounts? Beneficiary designations?" he asked once. "About 2 years ago. Said it would make things simpler if something happened to me." I told him I'd think about it. "And did you?" "I thought about it, yes." Prout nodded slowly. "Do you have a current will?" "I do. It was written when Nadine was alive. Everything went to her, then to Wade if she predeceased me." "So currently he inherits everything currently." Prout picked up a pen. "And you want to change that?" I looked out his window at a jacaranda tree, dropping purple blossoms onto the sidewalk. "I want to understand my options. I want to make decisions from a position of full information." I paused. "And I want to do it carefully, because whatever I decide, I need it to be right." He nodded. "Then let's start at the beginning." I spent the next 2 weeks educating myself the way I had always approached complex problems, methodically, with reference materials and a yellow legal pad. I checked out books from the Flagstaff Library on elder financial law, estate planning, and Arizona property statutes. The librarian, a woman about 40 with reading glasses pushed up on her head, scanned my stack and said, "Heavy reading Dajandine Research Project," I said. She looked at the titles. "Everything okay?" "Better than expected, actually." She didn't look entirely convinced, but she stamped the books and wished me a good evening. I read everything twice. I made notes in the margins. I cross-referenced Arizona statutes with what Prout had told me. I began to understand, in precise engineering terms, the structure of my situation, where the load-bearing walls were, where the weak points were, what leverage points existed. Wade called on a Sunday in March. He asked how I was settling into the apartment. I told him fine. He mentioned, almost as an aside, that he and Celeste had done a little more research on Sunridge, and there were actually a limited number of spots available in the spring cohort if I was interested in getting on the list. "The spring cohort," I repeated. "They do an intake group. Makes the transition easier, apparently. Shared orientation and all that." I told him I appreciated the information, that I'd think about it. After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a minute. Then I opened my legal pad to a fresh page and wrote 2 words at the top. Next steps. My neighbor in the apartment building was a woman named Opaline. She went by Opal, but not the one I've seen in that list of names. This was a different woman entirely, 74, retired schoolteacher, kept African violets on every windowsill. She brought me a coffee cake when I moved in and had appointed herself an informal advocate for my social well-being ever since. She knocked on my door on a Thursday evening in late March, carrying a casserole dish. "You've been very quiet," she said. "I've been thinking." Thinking looks the same as sad from the hallway. She handed me the casserole. "Chicken and rice. You need to eat." I let her in. We sat at my kitchen table, the one covered in legal pads and library books, and I told her an abbreviated version of the story. Not the inheritance. I wasn't ready to tell anyone that yet. But the brochure, the sticky note, the spring cohort. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My son did something similar to me about 6 years ago. He and his wife decided I should move to a place in Scottsdale. Had it all planned out before they brought it to me. Deposit paid and everything." "What did you do?" I told them that when I wanted their opinion about where I lived, I would ask for it, and until then, they could take their deposit and apply it to something useful. She took a sip of tea. "My son didn't speak to me for 4 months. Do you regret it?" She considered. "I regret that it happened at all. I don't regret what I said." She looked at my legal pads. "You're planning something. I'm considering my options." She smiled. "Good. Consider them carefully." I met with Prout again in April. This time I brought a folder with organized notes. Engineering habit, force of nature, and we spent 3 hours drafting a new estate plan. The will revision was straightforward. I established a charitable foundation in Nadine's name, the Nadine Ashworth Fund for Rural Infrastructure, which would build clean water systems in underserved communities in the American Southwest, the work I'd spent my career on, and which she had listened to me talk about for 31 years with genuine interest. The bulk of the inheritance, $38 million, would go to the foundation upon my death. The remaining $3 million I set aside in a separate trust, structured with conditions. These are unusual conditions, Prout said, reading over the draft. I'm an unusual man. He almost smiled. They're enforceable. That's what matters. I also had him review the deed to the vacation property in Sedona, a 3-bedroom house on 2 acres that Nadine and I had bought in 1998 and that I had kept after her death, the one asset my son had always assumed would eventually be his. It was mine outright. No encumbrances, no co-ownership. I had him document that clearly. One more thing, I said, before we finished. Prout waited. I want to do a media interview. Local news, if possible. Human interest. Retired engineer, unexpected inheritance, new chapter. I looked at him. I want the story out before I make any other moves. He studied me for a moment. Psychological groundwork. Information distribution, I said. My son thinks he knows exactly what I have and exactly what my options are. I'd like to correct that impression, publicly, before we have the next conversation. Prout set down his pen. You know, in 31 years, I've had clients who wanted revenge and called it justice, and clients who wanted justice and called it revenge. I've never been entirely sure which category produces better outcomes. I'm not interested in revenge, I said. I'm interested in accuracy. I want my son to have accurate information about his father. Prout picked up his pen again. I'll make some calls about the interview. The producer who returned Prout's call worked for a Phoenix station that ran a segment called Second Acts, stories about people who found unexpected purpose or direction after retirement. Her name was Tamsin Kowalski. We met at a coffee shop near the Flagstaff train station on a Wednesday morning in April. She was 38, sharp, carried a notebook and a tablet, and asked questions with the focused efficiency of someone who had learned to read people quickly. I told her about my career, 29 years with the Army Corps of Engineers, then a decade as an independent consultant, about Nadine, about Clive dying and the phone call from Denver and sitting in the Safeway parking lot. Walk me through the moment, she said. The attorney's office, when you got the final number. I wasn't in his office. He called. I was in my car, Ara, and the number was $41,300,000. She wrote it down without visible reaction, which told me she'd heard large numbers before. And you'd been estranged from your brother. 11 years. Was there any... Did it complicate the emotion? Receiving something like that from someone you weren't close to at the end? I thought about that honestly. Clive and I were alike in ways that made it difficult to be around each other. Both stubborn. Both certain we were right. If he'd told me he was leaving me money, I would have argued with him about it. I paused. This way he had the last word, which he always wanted. She smiled at that. What do you want people to take away from your story? That circumstances can change at any age. That the chapter you think is your last often isn't. I looked at her directly. That people who have written you off, for whatever reason, whatever assumption they've made about what you have or what you're capable of, those people can be wrong. She stopped writing and looked up at me. Something shifted in her expression. Not pity, something more like recognition. That's the story, she said quietly. We scheduled filming for the first week of May. Wade called in late April. He asked if I'd made any decisions about Sunridge. I told him I was still weighing things. He said the spring cohort deadline was in 2 weeks. I told him I understood. After the call, I texted Prout. Interview confirmed for May 7th. Please have all documents ready by May 5th. His response came within the hour. Everything will be ready. Travel planned? I had, in fact, already booked a trip. The annual conference of the American Society of Civil Engineers was held that year in Portland, Oregon, the second week of May. I had attended most years during my career and had registered in January, months before any of this began. The timing was, as Prout had noted when I mentioned it, fortuitously useful. The interview was filmed on a Wednesday. 2 cameras, a sound engineer, Tamsin asking questions in my living room while afternoon light came through the west windows. The framing was careful. Bookshelves behind me, a photo of Nadine on the side table, nothing staged. Tamsin had asked me not to rearrange anything, and I hadn't. She asked about Clive, about the inheritance, about what I planned to do with it. The foundation is the priority, I said, rural water access. Nadine believed that clean water was the single most equitable investment you could make in a community. She was right. She usually was. What would she think about all of this? I let the question sit for a moment. She would think it was very late in coming, and would not be remotely surprised that it had. Tamsin smiled. Do you have family watching this? Anyone you'd like to address? I looked at the camera. I'd say that people reveal themselves most clearly when they believe the stakes are low. When they think you have nothing, or are nothing, that's when you learn what they actually value. The interview ran 9 minutes and 40 seconds. It was scheduled to air on a Thursday evening, May 14th, at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. I flew to Portland on May 12th. My hotel was the Heathman, downtown Portland, 2 blocks from Powell's Books, which I visited the first afternoon and spent 90 minutes in without buying anything, simply because Nadine had always wanted to go, and I had always said we'd get there eventually. I bought a book about the history of American water infrastructure and a small volume of Mary Oliver poetry that Nadine had quoted to me once at the end, and that I had never read for myself. The conference began the next morning. I attended sessions on stormwater management and on municipal systems in drought-prone regions. I had lunch with a former colleague from my core days, a woman named Bete Szymanski, who now taught at Oregon State. We talked about work, about the profession, about people we'd known. She noticed something. "You seem settled," she said. "More than last year." "Things have clarified," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "That's cryptic. It won't be soon." On the evening of May 14th, I returned to my room at 5:30 Portland time, 6:30 in Flagstaff, and opened my laptop on the desk facing the window. I pulled up the Phoenix station's live stream, tested the connection. Strong signal. Set my phone on the desk beside the laptop, face up, volume off. I had a cup of tea. I watched the city lights beginning to come on outside. At 6 p.m. Mountain, the segment began. I watched myself on the screen, a 71-year-old man in a good shirt, sitting in his apartment, talking about his brother and his wife and $41 million. I watched the camera hold on my face when Tamsin asked about the number, and I watched my own expression. The pause, the careful answer, the way I looked directly at the lens when I said what I'd said about people revealing themselves when they believe the stakes are low. At 6 minutes and 40 seconds into the segment, my phone screen lit up. Wade calling. I didn't answer. It rang again immediately, then again. Then a text, "Dad, is this real? Call me." Then, "Dad, call me. What is going on?" Then a call from a number I didn't recognize, Celeste's work phone maybe, or a landline. I didn't answer that either. By the time the segment ended, I had 11 missed calls and 17 text messages. I read each one from the beginning. Wade's messages moved from shock to confusion to something that tightened in my chest. Not regret, not anger exactly. Something colder. Clarity, maybe. The same clarity I'd felt in February, sitting in the Safeway parking lot. A feeling of information resolving into something solid. The 17th message was from Celeste's number. It said, "Morton, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We would never want you to feel pushed out. Please call us. This is family. Morton." She'd never once called me Morton. In 14 years of marriage to my son, she had called me Dad exactly twice, on the day they got married and the day Nadine died, and referred to me in all other contexts as Wade's father, or, when she forgot I could hear her, the situation. I set the phone down. I opened the desk drawer and took out a piece of the hotel stationery, the heavy cream-colored kind that good hotels still provide, and wrote 2 sentences. I folded it, put it in my shirt pocket. Then I ordered room service, salmon, roasted vegetables, a glass of Oregon Pinot, and ate at the desk while reading the Mary Oliver book. When I finished eating, I pushed the tray to the corner of the room and called Prout on the hotel landline. "I watched it," he said, before I could speak. "So did they. 32 attempts to contact you, by my count." "My office phone rang 4 times this evening from an unknown Arizona number, Celeste," I said. "She called me Morton." A pause. "Do you want me to respond to them?" "Not yet. Let them sit with it through the weekend. I'll be back in Flagstaff Tuesday. We'll meet Wednesday morning. The documents are ready." "I know." "Thank you, Sylvester." I hung up and stood at the window for a long time, watching the Willamette River in the distance, a thin dark ribbon catching the last of the light. I later learned, through Opal, who had been called by Wade because he couldn't reach me, and had found her number in an old Christmas card I'd once sent him, that he had driven from Phoenix to Flagstaff on the Friday after the broadcast. He knocked on my apartment door. No answer. He spoke to the building manager, who told him I was traveling. He knocked on Opal's door. She told me she had answered in her housecoat at 9 in the morning, looked at my son standing in the hallway with his hair uncombed and his shirt half untucked, and said, "He's at a conference. He'll be back when he's back." Wade asked if she knew about the interview. She said she'd watched it and thought it was lovely. He asked if his father had seemed. He searched for the word, erratic, lately. She told him that in her experience, a man who had just inherited $41 million and spent 3 months quietly sorting his affairs before informing anyone was the opposite of erratic. Wade drove back to Phoenix. I returned to Flagstaff on Tuesday afternoon. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it. I made coffee, unpacked my bag, set the Mary Oliver book on the shelf beside a photograph of Nadine and me at the Grand Canyon from our 25th anniversary. On Wednesday morning, I met with Prout. He spread the documents across the conference table in his usual organized fashion, rubber-banded stacks each labeled in his careful handwriting. New will, signed and notarized. Foundation charter and IRS filings. Trust documents with conditions. Letter to Wade notifying him of the will change, prepared but not yet sent. Property documentation for the Sedona house. Are you ready? Prout asked. I've been ready since February, I said. I just needed to be sure. And you're sure now? I thought about the 17th text message. The word Morton. The spring cohort with its limited spots. I'd like Wade to come here, I said. Without Celeste. Just my son. Is that wise? Possibly not. But he is still my son. I want to look him in the face. Prout arranged the documents into 2 stacks. Then we do this in 2 parts. First, the conversation. Then, depending on how it goes, either the letter or the filing. I nodded. He called Wade's number from his desk phone, identified himself as my attorney, and asked Wade to come to Flagstaff at his earliest convenience for a meeting regarding his father's estate planning. Wade arrived the next morning. He looked exhausted. He'd lost weight in the 11 days since the broadcast, or maybe I was seeing him more clearly now. He sat in the chair across from me, and for a long moment neither of us said anything. Dad, he finally said. Wade, why didn't you tell me? I considered the question. It deserved a real answer. Because I wanted to know what you would do when you thought I had nothing. He flinched. Just slightly, but I saw it. The brochure, I said. The sticky note. The spring cohort with the deadline. I know what you were trying to do. I kept my voice level the way I had kept it when he handed me that manila envelope. You were trying to manage me. Move me somewhere contained and manageable before I became more of a problem. That's not. It's a little true, Wade. I leaned forward. I'm not angry at you for thinking it. I understand the calculus. You have a life, a mortgage, a schedule, a father who might need more than you want to give. I paused. What I'm asking is that you own it. Tell me it's true, and we can talk about what comes next. But don't sit in this room and tell me you were trying to help. Silence. Long enough that I could hear traffic outside on Route 66. Then my son said quietly, we didn't want the responsibility. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. I sat with it for a moment. Thank you, I said. He looked up. For saying that plainly. Your mother would have appreciated it. She always thought you were better at honesty than you gave yourself credit for. Wade looked at the table. Prout, who had been invisible in the corner of the room in the way that good attorneys learn to be, slid 2 documents across the table. I walked Wade through them. The new will. The foundation. Nadine's name on a nonprofit that would build water systems in rural Arizona and New Mexico and Utah. The $3 million in the conditional trust, available to him, contingent on a genuine relationship, evaluated annually by both of us in conversation rather than by a court. The conditions aren't punishments, I said. They're structures, like load-bearing walls. You can't remove them without the whole thing coming down. He read through everything twice. He asked questions, careful ones, which told me he was taking it seriously. When he got to the trust conditions, he read them 3 times. 1 phone call a week, he said, reading aloud, a real one, 20 minutes minimum, not a status update, a visit every 3 months, here or wherever I am, not a facility. He set the papers down. And Celeste? Celeste is your wife. I'm your father. Those are separate relationships, and I'll handle each of them separately. I looked at him. But she doesn't make decisions about where I live. That's mine. He was quiet for a long time. Dad, I'm sorry. I looked at my son, a 51-year-old man in a wrinkled shirt who had driven 3 hours at his attorney's request and sat across from his father and said the 2 true things in the same morning. I thought about Nadine, about what she would see in him that I sometimes missed. She had always been better at that. I know you are, I said. I'm not sure yet if you're sorry about what you did or sorry about what it cost you. That'll become clearer over time. I stood, buttoned my jacket. We'll know in a year. Wade nodded. He signed the acknowledgement page. Not the trust yet, just the acknowledgement that he'd been informed, and Prout notarized it. At the door, I paused. I'm going to Sedona this weekend, I said. The house needs some work. I thought I might start on the back porch. I could come, Wade said. Help! I looked at my son for a moment. All right, I said. Saturday morning. Bring your own gloves. I only have one pair. The Nadine Ashworth Fund for Rural Infrastructure was formally chartered in August, 4 months later. The first board meeting was held in a conference room at Northern Arizona University. 8 people around a table. Engineers, a water rights attorney, 2 representatives from tribal water authorities in the region, a former colleague of mine from the Corps. Prout sat in the corner taking notes. We discussed the first grant cycle. 17 applications from communities across the Southwest. I had read every one of them twice, made notes in the margins. After the meeting, the tribal representative, a man named Ellis Runningwater, who had spent 30 years fighting for water rights in the Navajo Nation, shook my hand and said, "Your wife had good instincts." She had excellent instincts, I said, about most things. I drove back to Flagstaff in the early evening, the mountains going orange in the west the way they do in August, when the monsoon light is particular. I had the windows down. The air smelled like rain coming. On my kitchen table, a letter from Prout confirming the Foundation's first grant cycle was funded. A postcard from Wade, actual paper, actual handwriting, that said simply, "Thinking of you this week. The back porch looks good." And a voicemail from Tamsin Kowalski at the Phoenix station, asking if I'd be willing to do a follow-up segment about the Foundation. I poured a glass of water and stood at my kitchen window. $41 million had not brought Nadine back. It had not made my son into the person I had hoped he would become, though it had perhaps created conditions in which he might. It had not made the past 4 years unhappen, the distance, the shortening calls, the manila envelope with the highlighted room rates. But it had built a table, and I had decided who sat at it. I drank my water and watched the light go down over the mountain, the way I had watched it with Nadine from this same window in the years, when this had been our kitchen, our window, our light, and I understood, not for the first time but more deeply than before, that what you leave behind is the only architecture that outlasts you. You can spend your life building other people's structures. At the end, the only one that matters is your own. I had spent 41 years as an engineer. I knew how to build something that would stand.